Silence is a blade, if you know how to hold it. Powerful men never looked at the help. Not truly. In the private dining hall of the Gyeong-ryung syndicate, maids like me were ghosts in aprons, silent, efficient, non-existent. That silence had kept me alive for 2 years. It also meant I heard everything. I saw the lieutenant's wrist turn, a movement too fluid to be casual. I saw the clear droplet fall from his cufflink. I saw it vanish into the vintage Pinot Noir like a whisper. 1 heartbeat. 2. I analyzed the viscosity in my mind, identifying the toxin from a life I'd buried. Colorless, odorless, tetroxin B, enough to mimic a stroke, enough to leave the most feared man in Seoul gasping for air while his own lieutenant stepped over his body to take the throne. I should have turned around. I should have refilled the water glasses, bowed my head, and returned to the shadows to keep my sister safe. But I watched Yoon Jae-sung, the devil of the district, a man of ritual stillness and tailored violence, lift the glass to his lips, and in that breath I made a choice that would turn a ghost back into a soldier. Outside, the neon pulse of Seoul bled through the rain, frantic and loud. Inside the estate, the silence was heavy, smelling of old leather and cold ambition. It was a dangerous place for a woman with a price on her head to hide, but it was the only place the assassins from Ghana wouldn't look, the only place a former operative could disappear. My name was Zola Mensah, though here I was just the help. At 28, I had perfected the art of being nothing. Spine straight, but head lowered. Power restrained. History erased. Protecting my sister from a continent away demanded total erasure. I poured wine worth more than my freedom for men who ordered executions between courses, while I worried about tuition fees and encrypted phone calls. 2 years of discipline. 2 years of playing the maid. Then he looked at me. Yoon Jae-sung sat at the head of the table like a king on an iron throne, immaculate, controlled, terrifyingly polite. He didn't command with volume, he commanded with precision. The tattoos peeking from his collar hinted at the violence beneath the polish. As I reached for the poisoned glass, his gaze shifted. It locked onto my hand, not with annoyance, not with lust, but with assessment. He saw the tension in my forearm. He saw the intent, and I knew the truth. My silence was broken, and the monster was finally looking back. The silence in the hallway was heavier than the dining room, broken only by the rhythmic click of Yoon Jae-sung's leather shoes and the rustle of my starched apron. He didn't use handcuffs. He didn't need to. His hand was a vice around my upper arm, his thumb pressing against the brachial artery with a precision that told me he knew exactly how much pressure would numb a limb. He maneuvered me into his private study, a room that smelled of cold ash and expensive ink, and slammed the heavy oak door. He didn't sit. He threw me toward the center of the room, but I didn't stumble. I pivoted, my weight shifting instinctively to the balls of my feet, my center of gravity low and stabilized. Jae-sung's eyes narrowed, tracking the movement. He didn't look at the dark spreading stain of Pinot Noir on his white shirt or the ruined silk of his tie. He looked at my hands. "The spill was clumsy," he said, his voice a low, terrifyingly polite purr. "But the recovery was elite. You didn't trip, Zola. You performed a tactical redirection of energy. Your hips stayed square, your eyes never left the lieutenant's throat, and you moved before the glass even tilted." He stepped into my personal space, the quiet menace now of physical heat. He reached out, his fingers catching the collar of my uniform, twisting the fabric just enough to graze the skin of my neck. "Who are you?" Because no maid in Seoul knows how to maintain a combat stance while holding a serving tray. I kept my gaze lowered for one more heartbeat, playing the ghost. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just a maid. Stop." The word was a scalpel. He pulled a serrated letter opener from his desk, the steel glinting under the dim lamp. He didn't point it at my heart. He held it like a man who knew how to find the gaps in a ribcage. "The next lie costs you a finger. The one after that, I find out who you're hiding in that apartment in Itaewon." The mention of my life outside the estate snapped the last thread of my restraint. The submissive curve of my shoulders straightened. I lifted my head, meeting his lethal assessment with a cold, level stare that belonged to a woman who had survived coups and jungle extractions. "If you drink that wine, you'll be dead before the paramedics hit the curb," I said, my voice dropping an octave into the steady tone of a briefing. Jae-sung froze, his eyes searching mine. "It's just wine." "It's tetroxin B," I countered, sniffing the air as the scent of the spilled liquid rose between us. Bitter almonds and a faint metallic sharp. Odorless to most, but I spent 3 years in a Ghanaian lab identifying every chemical signature the opposition used to vanish their enemies. Your lieutenant didn't slip, he executed a delivery. You were being erased, Jae-sung. I didn't ruin your suit, I saved your life. Jae-sung didn't move. He stood in the center of the room, the letter opener still held with lethal habit, but his gaze had shifted from a threat to a profound, unsettling curiosity. He reached for a sleek, encrypted tablet on his desk, his fingers flying across the glass with the same frantic precision he used for everything. I watched his face, the slight twitch of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the void where my digital footprint should have been. "I've had my security team digging since the moment we left the dining hall," he murmured, his voice sounding more like a confession than an interrogation. "Zola Mensa, a clean visa from Accra, 2 years of impeccable service records, no social media, no bank anomalies, no shadows. You're a ghost, Zola, but even ghosts leave a chill in the air. To be this invisible in Seoul, it takes a level of tradecraft that costs millions." He looked up, the tablet reflecting in his dark irises. "I found nothing, and in my world, nothing is the most dangerous thing of all. It means you're either a god or a professional." "I'm a mother trying to survive," I corrected, though the steel in my voice betrayed me. I stepped toward him, ignoring the blade in his hand, and reached for the lapel of his ruined jacket. For a second, his posture stiffened, a predatory instinct flaring, but he let me touch the fabric. I brought the stained silk to the light, pointing to the faint, crystalline crust forming at the edges of the wine spill. "Look at the refraction," I commanded. "Wine stains purple or brown. Tetroxin B reacts with oxygen to create a microscopic silver crystallization. It's a signature. It's designed to be ingested, where it enters the bloodstream and begins to fray the neural pathways." Jae-sung's breath hitched. He looked at the silver glint on his chest, then at his own hand, the hand that had been steady a moment ago, but now carried a microscopic rhythmic tremor. He tucked it into his pocket, but I had already seen it. "The madness, Jae-sung, the shadows you've been seeing in the corners of your eyes for the last 3 months, the sudden vertigo, the feeling that your own mind is slipping gears." I stepped closer, my voice softening but remaining clinical. "You thought it was the pressure of the syndicate. You thought you were losing your grip just like your father did." His silence was an admission. The dragon of Seoul looked suddenly, humanly vulnerable. He realized then that the war wasn't coming from the streets, it was already inside his veins. The realization sparked a new kind of fire in his eyes, a cold, calculated rage. He wasn't going mad, he was being murdered. How long? He asked, his voice a jagged edge. In small doses, months, but tonight was the finish line. The lieutenant wasn't just tracking you, he was closing the lid on your coffin.
The digital trail began in the dark corners of the pharmaceutical black market, a world I knew better than my own name. Jae-sung watched in a heavy, brooding silence as I bypassed 3 layers of encryption on his desktop, my fingers flying with a muscle memory that felt like waking up from a long sleep. We traced the chemical signature of the tetroxin B through a series of shell companies based in Macau, finally hitting a direct procurement log linked to a high-end medical supplier in the Gangnam district. The buyer used a dead-drop protocol, I murmured, the glow of the screen washing my face in pale blue. But they were arrogant. They used a private courier service owned by a subsidiary of your own holding company. Jae-sung leaned over my shoulder, his presence a cold weight. Identify the account holder. I hit the final keystroke. The name that scrolled across the screen wasn't the lieutenant's. It was a name that carried the weight of the syndicate's entire history. Kim Hyung-soo. Jae-sung's breath hitched, a sharp, jagged sound in the quiet room. The Elder, he whispered. The icy control that defined him didn't just crack, it shattered. He surged away from the desk, his hand sweeping a crystal decanter off the side table. It smashed against the far wall, amber liquid weeping down the wallpaper like a fresh wound. My uncle, he spat, his voice trembling with a raw, visceral fury I hadn't expected. He sat at my father's funeral and promised to be my shield. He watched me struggle for months, watched me question my own sanity, and smiled while he offered me traditional medicine to help with the stress. He turned back to me, his eyes bloodshot, the ritual stillness gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a trapped predator. The lieutenant was just a tool, a delivery boy. My own blood was the one twisting the knife. He didn't just want me dead, Zola. He wanted me to die thinking I was a failure, a madman who destroyed his father's legacy. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible. I had seen men break before, and this was the most dangerous kind of fracture, the kind that turned a strategist into a butcher.
He's gaslighting the entire board, I said, my voice grounding the room. The tremors, the vertigo, he was building a case for your incompetence. He wasn't just killing you, he was preparing a hostile takeover from the inside. Jae-sung gripped the back of a leather chair, his knuckles white enough to pop. He thinks I'm soft because I prefer precision over chaos. He thinks he can treat me like a child. He looked at me then, the vulnerability I'd seen earlier hardening into a terrifying obsidian resolve. He made one mistake. He didn't realize I had a ghost in my house who could see through his shadows. The transition from discovery to disaster happened in the span of a single vibration. Jae-sung was still staring at the shattered glass on his floor when my burner phone screamed against the mahogany desk. My heart didn't just beat, it recoiled. Only one person had this number. I swiped the screen, my breath hitching as a grainy video file flickered into life. It wasn't a message from my sister, Amara. It was a live feed of her dormitory at the boarding school outside Seoul. The room was empty, the covers on her bed tossed aside as if she'd been dragged out mid-dream. A shadow moved across the frame, a man wearing the charcoal suit of the Gimryong security detail. A voice like dry parchment filled the small speaker. "You have a remarkable resume, Ms. Mensah, or should I call you Lieutenant?" Jae-sung stiffened, his eyes snapping to the phone. He recognized the voice instantly. The Elder. "You were a variable I didn't account for," the old man continued, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than a kidnapping. "My nephew has always had a weakness for broken things he finds in the street. But you aren't a maid, and you aren't just a witness. You were the weapon that jammed my gears. If you touch her," I began,
my voice a low, vibrating snarl that made Jae-sung's eyebrows lift in surprise. "There is no corner of this earth where you can hide from me." "Empty threats are for the desperate," the elder sighed. "Let's discuss reality. My nephew is currently alive because of you. I want that corrected. The tetroxin B is still in the house, I presume, or perhaps you have other skills. It doesn't matter. By sunrise, I expect Yoon Jae-sung to be a memory. If his heart is still beating when the sun touches the Han River, your sister will be delivered to the people you ran away from in Ghana. I believe they still have a very high price on her head." The line went dead. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air from the room. I looked at Jae-sung. He was no longer the boss, and I was no longer the maid. We were two predators standing in the ruins of a life we had both tried to fake. "He knows," I whispered, the weight of my past finally crashing down. "He knows about the coup in Accra. He knows she's the only reason I'm still breathing." Jae-sung stepped toward me, his hand reaching out, not to restrain me this time, but to steady me. His touch was cold, his eyes reflecting a shared, bitter understanding. "He thinks he has found your leash, Zola. He thinks he can use your love to turn you into his assassin." "I have," I said, my voice breaking. "No," Jae-sung countered, his grip tightening on my arm, his voice returning to that ritual, lethal stillness. "He wants a dead body by sunrise. We'll give him one, but it won't be mine." Moved before the echoes of the dial tone had even faded. The uniform felt like a straitjacket now, a polyester lie that I needed to shed. I reached for my jacket, my movements jagged and frantic, fueled by the cold image of Amara's empty bed. I didn't care about the syndicate, the poison, or the man standing in the center of the room. I was a ghost, and ghosts were meant to vanish when the light got too bright. I reached the door, my hand on the heavy brass handle, when a shadow eclipsed the light. Jae-sung didn't grab me this time. He simply stepped into my path, his stature a wall of tailored black wool and immovable intent. "Move," I hissed, the submissive maid long dead. My hand went to the small of my back, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, my fingers curling into a fist. "I'm not one of your soldiers, Jae-sung. I don't follow your orders. They have my sister." "And you'll be dead before you cross the city limits," he replied, his voice a calm, low vibration that grated against my panic. "My uncle has eyes on every street corner. You think you can storm a fortified estate alone? You're an operative, Zola. You know the math. You're walking into a slaughterhouse." "Then I'll die," I snapped, stepping into his space until our chests nearly touched. "But I won't stay here while she's used as a bargaining chip for your life." Jae-sung looked down at me, his gaze dark and unreadable. Slowly, he reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a gold-plated burner phone, placing it in my hand. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you to win." I looked at the phone, then back at him. "Why?" "Because he took something of mine, too," he said, and for a fleeting second the quiet menace was replaced by a shared, jagged grief. "He took my trust. He took my family, and he thinks he knows how this ends. He wants a body, Zola. Let's give him one." The plan formed in the silence between our breaths. It was a suicide mission dressed as a betrayal. I would call the elder, claiming the tetroxin B had finally done its work. I would offer to deliver Jae-sung's corpse to his estate in exchange for Amara's release. To the world, I would be the traitorous maid who finally finished the job. To the elder, I would be a tool returned to its shed. But inside the body bag, the dragon of soul would be waiting, and in my sleeve, the ghost would carry the sting. "You're trusting me to hand you over to the man who wants you dead," I whispered. Jae-sung adjusted his cuffs, his ritual stillness returning, sharper than ever. I'm not trusting a maid, Zola. I'm trusting the woman who saved me when she had every reason to walk away. Now, call him. Tell him I'm gone. The safe house was a concrete skeleton of an unfinished luxury loft overlooking the Han River, hidden behind layers of industrial plastic and rusted scaffolding. It was a place of raw edges and shadows, far removed from the polished mahogany of the estate. Here, the air was cold, smelling of rain and wet stone, stripped of the distractions of wealth. Jae-sung sat on a crate, his tailored jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal the ink that climbed his forearms, intricate, dark dragons coiling around scars that didn't come from boardroom battles. For the first time, his ritual stillness felt less like a choice and more like a heavy, exhausting weight. "You're staring," he said, though he didn't look up. His voice lacked its usual edge, sounding instead like a man who had been holding his breath for a decade. "I'm analyzing," I replied, checking the action on the suppressed handgun he had provided. "You have a scar on your left radial. That's a defensive wound from a blade. You were young."
Jae-sung finally looked at me, his gaze lingering on the way I handled the weapon. 17. My father told me that to lead, I had to survive the people who loved me most. He was right. Every day since has been a performance of strength to keep the wolves from the door. He leaned back, the shadows deepening the hollows of his cheeks. "It's a lonely throne, Zola. You spend your life looking for enemies, only to realize the mirror is the only thing left that doesn't lie." I set the gun down and moved toward him, the distance between us shrinking until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I reached out, my fingers tracing the line of a tattoo on his wrist, the place where the tremor had been most visible. "I spent my life being a ghost so I wouldn't have to feel that weight," I whispered. "But even ghosts get tired of the cold." Jae-sung's hand covered mine. His skin was rough, his grip firm and grounding. He didn't pull me closer with the dominance of a boss. He leaned into me with the desperation of a man who had finally found a witness. In that small, quiet room, the dragon of Seoul disappeared. There was only a man who had been poisoned by his own blood, and a woman who had killed her own identity to save a child. He stood, his face inches from mine, his eyes searching the restrained power I had worn as a mask for so long. "When this is over," he murmured, his breath ghosting over my lips, "I don't want the maid, and I don't want the operative. I want the woman who saw the poison when everyone else saw the wine." I didn't pull away. I closed the gap, our foreheads touching in a silent, jagged vow. The mission was a suicide run, but for the first time in years, I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was fighting for the man who saw the queen beneath the uniform. The Elder's Fortress was a brutalist monument of granite and iron hidden in the shadows of Bukhan Mountain. Rain lashed against the armored SUV as the gates groaned open, welcoming us into a courtyard swarming with men in charcoal suits. I stepped out into the cold, my posture shifting back into the submissive, hollow-eyed shell of a maid, while two guards hauled Jae-sung's limp, sedated body from the back seat. The air inside the main hall was thick with the scent of incense and old paper. The elder sat on a raised platform, sipping tea from a delicate celadon cup. He looked like a grandfather in his traditional hanbok, but his eyes were the cold, dead glass of a taxidermist's trophy. "You delivered," he said, his voice a dry rasp that echoed in the vast room. He didn't look at his nephew's face. He looked at the stain on Jae-sung's shirt as if it were a job well done. "I suppose I should be impressed. A woman of your background usually possesses a troublesome amount of loyalty, but I suppose a maid always knows when it's time to switch masters for a better wage." He gestured with a skeletal hand. Two men emerged from a side door, dragging Amara between them. Her small feet scavenged for purchase on the polished floor, her eyes wide with a terror that tore through my chest. "Amara!" The name caught in my throat, but I forced my face to remain a mask of stone. "Patience, Miss Mensa," the elder tutted, treating me like a servant who had spoken out of turn. "You've done your part, you've removed the rot from this family, but help is so rarely tidy. My guards tell me you handled yourself with quite a bit of grace during the accident at the dinner. It makes me wonder if I can truly let such a talented ghost wander the streets of my city." He nodded to the guards. 6 men stepped forward, their hands moving to the holsters at their hips, the ritual stillness of the room ripening into a countdown to execution. They were confident. They saw a broken maid and a dead boss. They saw the help who had served her purpose. I watched the lead guard, the one holding Amara's arm. I saw the way his weight shifted, the way his thumb hooked over his belt, relaxing as he prepared to laugh at the old man's wit. I counted the breaths in the room, the rhythm of the rain on the skylight, and the precise moment the muzzle of his rifle dipped an inch toward the floor. "You should have looked closer at the wine," I whispered. The elder frowned. "What?" "It wasn't just poison," I said, my voice rising with a cold, sharp clarity. "It was a distraction." At the sound of my voice, the signal, the dead man on the floor didn't just move, he exploded. The transition from stillness to slaughter was instantaneous. Jae-sung didn't just stand, he surged from the floor with the predatory grace of a creature that had been coiled for the kill. He had never been sedated, the corpse was a Trojan horse, and the fortress was no longer a sanctuary for the elder. "Now!" I screamed, the word a detonator. Before the lead guard could process the change, I was in his space. I didn't reach for a gun, I used my hands, the tools of a ghost trained in the art of vanishing lives. I drove the heel of my palm into his chin, his head snapping back with a sickening crack as I stripped the rifle from his grip. To my left, 2 more guards moved, but I was a blur of black fabric and focused rage. I pivoted, sweeping the legs of the second man while using the rifle's stock to crush the throat of the third. Across the hall, Jae-sung was a whirlwind of precision. He didn't waste movement. He moved through his uncle's inner circle, not like a nephew, but like an inevitable judgment. He disarmed the lieutenant with a single brutal twist of the wrist, the bone snapping like dry kindling. The elder scrambled back, his celadon teacup shattering on the stone, his face twisting from arrogance to a mask of ancient, withered fear. You were supposed to be broken," he shrieked, backing toward the edge of the platform. "I was merely waiting for you to stop hiding." Jae-sung's voice rang out, cold and resonant as a funeral bell. I caught Amara, shielding her body with mine as I pushed her behind a heavy marble pillar. "Stay down, don't look." As I turned back to the fray, I saw the flash of steel in the shadows. The lieutenant, bleeding and desperate, had pulled a hidden sidearm. His barrel was leveled directly at Jae-sung's back, his finger tightening in a final, spiteful act of betrayal. Jae-sung was focused on the elder, his hands inches from the old man's throat, unaware of the viper behind him. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the dosage or the risk. I simply moved. The sound of the gunshot was a physical punch, a thunderclap that swallowed the room. I felt the white-hot fire in my shoulder as I threw myself into the path of the bullet. The force spun me around, the world tilting as my knees hit the cold stone. Jae-sung spun, his eyes wide, catching the lieutenant in a lethal choke before the man could fire again. With a sharp, decisive snap, he ended the threat and let the body drop like trash. He didn't look at his uncle. He didn't look at the fallen throne. He dropped to the floor beside me, his hands, the hands that had killed seconds ago, trembling as they pressed against the red stain spreading across my uniform. "Zola," he choked out, the ritual stillness finally, utterly gone. I looked up at him, the pain a distant thrumming. I saw the man who had been alone, now looking at me with a terrifying, beautiful desperation. My loyalty wasn't a contract. It wasn't a choice made by a maid or an operative. "I told you," I whispered, the darkness tugging at the edges of my vision. "No more poison." The master suite of the Gyeom-ryong estate was a sanctuary of silk and silence, a far cry from the utilitarian shadows of the servants' quarters. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the winter sun hung low over Seoul, painting the city in shades of bruised gold. I sat by the window, the heavy bandages beneath my robe a constant, dull reminder of the fire in the fortress. Amara was in the garden below, her laughter echoing faintly as she chased a golden retriever through the frost, a sound that was the only medicine I truly needed. The door opened with a familiar, deliberate click. Yoon Jae-sung entered, his ritual stillness now possessing a newfound warmth. He had traded his black suit for a charcoal sweater, looking less like a phantom of the underworld and more like a man who had finally stepped into the light. He carried a small lacquered box, placing it on the table between us. "The elder has been retired," he said, his voice a low, steady vibration. "The syndicate has been purged of the rot, and the board has accepted the truth of my recovery. You were right about the science, Zola. Without the toxin, the shadows have vanished." He opened the box. Inside lay 2 documents, passports with the seal of a neutral European nation. I picked one up, tracing the name Elena Vance. It was a masterpiece of forgery, clean, untraceable, and backed by a lifetime of legitimate history. "A new life," Jae-sung murmured, "for you and Amara. There are accounts in Zurich that will ensure you never have to work, let alone hide, ever again. No ghosts, no uniforms, no debt. You are free to leave tonight." I looked from the passport to the man who had offered me the world. "And the second thing?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy gold signet ring, the dragon crest of the Gyeom-ryong etched into the metal. He didn't place it on the table, he held it out in the palm of his hand, a silent, heavy question. "I am the king of a dark world, Zola. It is a place of precision and violence, and I have spent my life navigating it alone. But you are the only one who sees the poison before it's poured. You are the only one who knows the weight of the crown." He stepped closer, his gaze locked onto mine with a terrifying, beautiful honesty. "I'm not asking for a maid. I'm not even asking for a soldier. I'm asking for my equal. Stay, not because you are bound by a contract or a debt, but because the throne is too cold for one person." I looked at the passport, the easy exit I had prayed for, and then at the ring. The invisibility that had once been my superpower felt like a shroud I was ready to burn. I reached out, my fingers brushing his as I took the ring. "The wine was always a distraction," I whispered, a slow smile breaking the mask I had worn for years. "I think I'd rather stay and watch the bottle." I stayed, not as a ghost, but as the queen who lived in the light. Sometimes the smallest voices tell the biggest stories. If you believe that even the hardest hearts can be changed by a single act of bravery, subscribe and turn on notifications. We have many more tales of unexpected heroes waiting to be told.